Welcome back, everyone. I have been looking forward to this episode for a very long time now. I'm super excited to be welcomed by Jeff Bartsch. He is the founding communication strategist at Story Greenlight and has been recognized as a top 30 thought leader in the accounting advisory world. With over 20 years of professional background in the entertainment industry and client coaching, Jeff has helped shape content for clients including ABC, NBC, Disney, Apple, Netflix, and many more. Jeff's commentary has been featured on publications including Accounting Today, the Associated Press, and USA Today. Through Story Greenlight, Jeff empowers accounting advisors to attract and keep their ideal advisory clients so they can expand their business and their impact in the world. He believes that the power of story is within everyone and that human connection is everything. Jeff is such an exciting person to talk to. So, welcome, Jeff, to the podcast.
Thanks, man. Looking forward to this.
So, you have a very impressive resume and an interesting path to kind of connecting with the accounting world. Do you want to give us a little bit of background?
Sure. And I got to tell you, I'm really looking forward to this because I'm looking forward to maybe digging into some different angles of my journey in a way that might speak specifically to your audience today that might not really connect in the same way if you've had your CPA for 20 years or 30 years and you're just counting the busy seasons until you can retire or something like that. So super stoked about this. If you're just meeting me, my name is Jeff Bartsch. And if you look up Jeff Bartsch on the internet, the number one thing you will probably see is that I spent 20 years making TV in Los Angeles, which is true. And the thing I want to throw out for your consideration right here is everyone thinks that Hollywood is about movies and TV. And I'm here to tell you that it's not ultimately about movies and TV. In the same way, I would offer that the world thinks that accounting is about numbers. In the same way, accounting is not ultimately about numbers. So I'm not going to give you any answers. I think let's have the opportunity to kind of explore and dig into those ideas as we go. The thing that really connected for me not all that many years ago. I'm 45 years old right now, and it took me a very long time to realize that all the different areas of my life that I thought were separate were actually connected by the same thing. And the first element that I can point back to was when I was 4 years old and someone brought a piano into our house. I started picking out melodies on this piano, and for the next 20 some years of my life, I was known as Jeff the Piano Guy. I started playing piano by ear and I got trained classically. And my dad has been a pastor almost my entire life. And so I got all my reps as a musician on Sunday mornings in church. So I would play classical music. I'd play Bach and Mozart. And everyone says, "Oh, Jeff, you're such an amazing piano player." And I'd pat myself on the back and think I was amazing. And there was a day that I got pulled up short. There was a lady who came by, and she said, "Jeff," and she was an older musician at the church, and she said, "Jeff, it's all well and good to play the notes on the page, but when you get older, you have to learn to play from your soul." Now, I was in elementary school at this point. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, and I thought that had to be the dumbest thing I'd ever heard in my life. I mean, everyone was telling me that I was doing awesome. And so what does this lady know? Well, it turns out I didn't realize that she was right until years later, until after I had taken the basics and the fundamentals of playing the piano and I had made them disappear to the point where I could actually bring the music to life. And when I did that, people started responding in a different way. Instead of saying, "Jeff, you're such an amazing piano player," they would come up to me and say, "Jeff, that was the exact song that I needed to hear this morning. Thank you for playing that song." And every once in a while, someone would come up to me and say, "Jeff, the way you contributed to the world this morning brought me into an encounter with God. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for what you do. And that's the kind of thing where I realized, okay, this is way bigger than me. I need to get off. I need to get out of my own ego and figure out what's going on here, because there's something powerful going on. What I didn't realize at the time was that I had learned how to take an ordinary message and elevate it to something extraordinary into a way that connected with its audience. And as it turns out, I've been doing that for 40 years. I've been doing that my entire life in one way or another. So, broad strokes, ended up doing that in junior high. I learned about video production when video production was still actually really hard to do with big, complicated equipment. Cell phones had not been invented yet, so you couldn't just pull your phone out of your phone out of your pocket and hit record. So learned about that. I learned about how to do radio in college. I learned how to do film school. I was learning about film production and video production in film school, and that's what turned into 20 years of editing television in Hollywood. And at that point, I continued learning my craft, learning my skills. I figured I was going to be a musician for the rest of my life. I figured I was going to do television for the rest of my life. Turns out, turns out it took a different path than what you would think. A few years into my time in Hollywood, I realized that if I stayed in this path, that I would be hitting an income ceiling, and I wanted more potential than that. So I started learning about professional coaching and online business building. And that's what ultimately transitioned into professional coaching and consulting in the business world. And that's how I got into accounting. I'm not an accountant, by the way, but I talk to them all the time.
I love that journey, and I love how the simplicity of even learning the piano has transformed you in your journey. So tell us a little bit about, I'm curious, tell us a little bit about what you did in Hollywood and how the experiences there have translated to what you do with accountants every day now.
Sure. So sometimes people ask me, Jeff, how is it that you're a communication strategist and a thought leader development coach? How did you, there are so many different places that can use that. And how did you end up applying that within the accounting world? And the fact of the matter is, I feel a lot of kinship, because the role that I was in as a television editor was me sitting in a room. Don't get me wrong. There were some super cool times when I did get to show up on set and I saw all the production stuff and I got to meet some cool people. Most of the time, it wasn't that. It was me sitting in a room with a really powerful computer with hours and hours and hours of footage, putting together the building blocks of music and picture and sound and ideas and emotions and graphics and music and all that stuff, and putting it together into finished television that created an emotional reaction in the audience. And so what I realized was the process of doing that. Oh, by the way, before I get into what I was actually doing, you want to talk about attention to detail? There have been times when people would bring me on and I would spend an entire week building 90 seconds of television. A lot of the time they'd say, okay, well, we have these chunks of the show that they're broken down into acts like a play. So a half-hour show would be 4 acts. An hour-long show would be 6 acts. And, we need to you need to get through an act every week, kind of a thing. It's like, okay, well, that's normal. But if you're working on a super specific show open or something like that, sometimes they'd say, take as long as you need to take, just make it good. And that I just love that idea. Just digging into all the nerdy little details, all the little nuances of every little thing. And I realized that there's all that attention to detail, all that fiddling and all that examining I realized that there's a lot of that happens in the numbers and analytics and all that side of accounting. And I thought, yeah, and I think, you know what, this, I get this. And the fact that you not only do it, but you like it. You have to have some kind of a personality to be able to do that. So not just anyone can do it and love it. So that's one of the main reasons that I realized that I really love this kind of, I connect with that kind of a mindset. Now, to your question though, how did that all translate to the coaching? I realized that Hollywood, as I said earlier, it's not just about film. It's not just about TV. Those are just vehicles for the ultimate deliverable. And depending on who you talk about, some people might say that the deliverable is stories. That's getting closer, but that's not even the ultimate deliverable. The ultimate deliverable is a change in emotional state. And it's in the audience. That's what Hollywood does. It brings about change in the emotional state of its audience. And sometimes it does it in a really superficial way where it's just you laugh and you have fun and you move on and you forget about it. And your emotional or mental state just goes back to the way it was. Sometimes they do it in such a way where it gets into your heart and mind and it changes you and it sticks. Maybe for weeks, maybe for months, maybe for the rest of your life. So I really started thinking about what is the power behind that? What is the power behind a message that can truly connect with someone in a way that it resonates and penetrates the heart and mind of someone to the point where they can actually change the way you see the world? That is what I help my clients do in the accounting advisory world. I'd say, hey, how is it in a world, I can't say that phrase without kind of chuckling because, I first got into Hollywood in the times when every trailer started out with, in a world where someone does something and one thing can change it all. Just that kind of stuff. I can't hear that phrase without laughing. So how does it work in a world with accounting where the world thinks that we don't know what accountants are? We know that they're important, so we'll just put up with them. They're a cost center. We'll have to pay for them. Okay, fine. Bring us into compliance. Fine, whatever.
They're boring.
But yeah, and just stay in the corner and don't speak until you're spoken to. Just do your thing and file the tax returns, and you better get us a return, otherwise we'll be mad. How do you, in a place where that's how the world sees accountants, how do you say, pick me instead of other people? How do you say, I have more value to offer than you think I do? And let me tell you why. And that's when you have to start drawing on these ideas of who are you? Who are you for? What do you say? How do you say it? And how does that spread? Those are the kind of things that you have to start digging into. And that's what I call the communication tree. You start out with the positioning of who you are and who you're for. The trunk of the tree, think of it as the messaging, what you say and why you say it. And the thing is, in business, it all branches out because every part of business has communication, because you can go off externally into your marketing. You can go internally with your sales, your one-on-one sales conversations. You have it internally with your client-facing interactions, and you have it internally with your team and your coworkers and your vendors. Anytime you interact with human beings, you have to deal with communication, and your positioning and your communication and your messaging affects all that. But specifically for the people that for my role in the accounting world, specifically in the CAS 2.0 advisory world, is how do we take this powerful positioning and messaging through the marketing channels and say, hey, this is the value that we bring. This is the change that we can bring to you and your business. And this is why we should work together. Let's have a conversation. I could talk about this for a long time, so I'll just stop for the moment. What are your thoughts so far?
Well, I just love that you're transforming the idea of accountants. I think a big push for me as, you know, a young accounting student right now is that the rebrand of the accountant or the CPA is a part of my mission,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, I talk to finance and marketing students in school and they're like, "You're studying accounting? Like, you're so charismatic and excited and pumped up about accounting. How's that possible? Like my financial accounting class was so boring." But I guess because I've gotten to know people like you and seen things like what Summit by Anders is doing,
Mm-hmm.
and I can see past the boring idea of an accountant, right? And the other thing I really want to hit on with what you're doing is we're taking this idea that the CPA is just for compliance, that you just do a tax return, that you just get the month end close done, to being a person who can distill complex financial data down in a way that anybody, regardless of their financial understanding, can understand it. I
Right.
mean, in industry, that's what the job of a controller and a CFO is. You're explaining the complex financial data that you and your team have been compiling all month and year to a CEO who potentially doesn't have a background in accounting and might not understand that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, the better communicators that we are as CPAs and as accountants, the better we're going to be able to serve our clients and actually change the world with all the hard, boring, you know, data that we deal with every single day.
I got to tell you, I so love this idea because I want to tell you about a time when it was pretty early in my career. Early in my career in LA, I was really wanting to, when I was first thinking about, okay, what might life look like beyond sitting in this room with a computer playing Legos with all these different elements and turning that into TV. What might life look like after that? Beyond that. And I thought that I wanted to get into television or movie producing. And so I started doing some producing work on some short films. I even got involved in some feature films and some financing kind of things. And during that season, I went to an industry mixer at Warner Brothers. Now, it wasn't at Warner Brothers. I don't remember exactly where it was, but there was a re-recording mixer, a staff re-recording mixer from Warner's who was on this panel. And re-recording mixers are the ones that sit on their own private mixing stage, their own separate movie theater, and they run an entire mixing stage with a crew of editors, of dialogue and sound effects editors and music editors, and they bring all the elements together and create that final sound mix for the movie. And someone said, how do you deal with all the technology? And how do you stay on top of all that? Because this guy was sitting in front of a mixing console that literally stretched from one side of the mixing stage to the other. This massive, monstrous mixing console. It looked like the control room of, it looked like the control room at NASA. It was crazy. And the thing that he said has always stuck with me. He said, you have to learn the fundamentals and you have to learn all the tools. And the bigger and more impressive the tools are, the more important it is that you learn them so well that you know them like the back of their hand so that you can make them disappear. And when you make the tools disappear, that allows you to focus on what really matters. And that has stuck with me ever since, because his job was not to say, hey, we'll get you, we'll get you a 2 hour long 7.1 channel Dolby Atmos sound mix in compliance with all the standards of any movie studio in any movie theater out there. That's not the point. The point was he is creating the experience of the movie. That's what he was doing. All that other stuff is in service to that bigger goal. And so, to your point of saying, okay, what is accounting all about? Sometimes the goal is, in the traditional compliance sense, hey, our goal is to make sure that you have the peace of mind knowing that you have clean books, you're operating within the guidelines of all the legal entities who control what you do, who have oversight of what you do. You are safe. You can have peace of mind. Other times it's saying, it's like the tagline of Summit Virtual CFO. They say, we're changing the way people think about accounting. Instead of saying, this is just about historical reports. We make reports showing what you do and what happened last month or last quarter. We're helping you say, how does your business run in light of your financials, in light of your cash position, in terms of your KPIs, in terms of all these things that make your business do what it does? And how can we make the decisions now that affect how your business grows in the future? That is a huge change. And that is a huge shift in what that value delivery is.
Well, and the profession was not like that for a long time. This is relatively new, right?
Mm-hmm.
This whole idea of CAS, of adding advisory onto bookkeeping. I mean, even 10, 15, 20 years ago, and CPAs were turning away bookkeeping work because it was above their pay grade, because bookkeepers were just people who couldn't get a job somewhere else, so they did books. But so moving on that point, as the profession shifts and as this focus is turned towards advisory and adding value to our clients, what can students do to further develop these communication skills early? So, I mean, and even specifically in the classroom, it seems like there's this intense focus on sticking your head in the textbook and learning the hard skills of accounting, right? Which is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
But if the next generation of accountants doesn't have these communication skills, they're not going to be successful. So what can these young people do now to start preparing for that?
I would say I'd take a page out of that mixer, the re-recording mixer from Warner's. I'd take a page out of his book and say, number one is you have to learn the foundational skills. When I was in elementary school, I had to learn what those black dots on the page meant. I had to learn how to move my fingers and pitch and press which keys and connect those ideas together. And then I had to say, okay, what is the bigger picture of all that music on the page? How do I understand that? And in the bigger picture of how I'm delivering the song, and there are levels above it from there. But it all started with the fundamentals. And that's the same thing with anything that you put your hand to that requires any level of skill or mastery. There will always be a level of fundamentals. And then you build on those, and then you layer extra, you layer extra skills on top of that to figure out what is the true value, what is the true impact that I bring into the world. So, at the risk of sounding like a bit of a downer right now, I would say the diluted earnings per share, okay, you may not have to know exactly how that runs, but it's part of the foundational skills. If when someone says to you, what is this accrual thing versus cash basis, and why should I care? If you don't truly know what it is and what the differences between those are, then you won't have any way of doing anything like saying, hey, imagine you have a lemonade stand and you're thinking, okay, is my lemonade stand having a good month or not? Well, You can say, if you're using the cash basis, it's like you say, last month I bought lots of lemons and lots of sugar, but I didn't sell anything. So I had a really bad month. But then this month, I set up the lemonade stand and everyone bought all the lemonade. It was all profit. I had a fantastic month. But the question is, did I really make money? And so you can talk to people about, hey, so if you're talking with an accrual basis, you can say, hey, we shift these expenses and the revenue and put them together in time so they match up, so you can see, am I having a good month or not? But if you don't know the difference to begin with, if you haven't put in the fundamental classes and learned about the journal entries, learned about the debits and credits, learned about the regulatory laws, all the things, you won't have that foundation to build on. So when you go beyond that, once you have those foundational elements, you say, where do I want to see myself going? What is the value that I could imagine that I see other people bringing into the world? And what might that look like for me? And what are the skills that they need, that I would need to make that happen as well? So a lot of people say, okay, well, let's move into advisory, and let's give advice, but they don't really know what that involves, because if the only thing that you've learned about is your P&L and your cash flow statement and your balance sheet, and you don't know what a KPI is, KPIs are what drive business. And the biggest KPIs that drive the numbers in any business are not numbers in and of themselves. I mean, they can be represented by numbers, but you're talking about, if you're running a trucking operation, you're thinking about things like, okay, how many trailers do I have? How much rent, or what am I paying for leases on the tractors on those trailers? How often are they on the road? What's their mileage? How many loads are they doing in what amount of time? What is my profit per load? That kind of stuff. Those are the kind of industry specific KPIs that you can bring back to, and with your existing knowledge of finance and numbers, and saying, okay, well, this is how these are all tying together into what you see on the P&L, on the balance sheet, on the cash flow statement. That's where things start becoming super valuable. But if you don't know, if you haven't learned about those different parts of business, you don't have that value to offer yet. When you have people coming in on your show, what are the kind of things that you've heard that they recommend to learn?
You got to know the basics. You got to be proficient in, I mean, it's just like you've explained with two stories now, with your piano story and with the story with the mixer from Warner. If you don't know the tech stack, if you don't know, if you don't have your keyboard shortcuts down for Excel yet, if you don't know your debits and credits, and even the stuff like diluted earnings per share, which I hate,
I know.
you won't be able to speak to your clients. You're completely right. Because they need to be able to trust your industry knowledge. How are you going to be a good communicator if they can't completely trust that you're the best at what you do? And also on top of that, the reason they're trusting us, the reason they're coming to us for advisory and for compliance work, is because we have a knowledge that far exceeds what they have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're a CPA for a marketing agency, they're coming to you because they have no idea about accounting stuff. They only know marketing. And so having that foundation, being the best professional you can be, yeah, I hear it from many of my guests. I think another thing I would add to that is being able to see past just audit and tax. We've existed in a world that CPAs have been categorized as just those two things. but I love what Summit's doing because there's a focus back on bookkeeping a little bit more, because as a CFO, you have to understand where everything's coming from, how everything's being categorized. So that's another thing I hear that maybe isn't being touched on as much in school, but can be something that students and young CPAs can do outside of the classroom, is understanding bookkeeping and how cash flows through a business every single day.
I'll do you one further than that. If you're down for it, start a business of your own. Start a little side hustle of your own. You'll find out pretty quickly that just because you're good at doing a thing does not mean you are automatically good at running a business. Ask me how I know this. My first business that I started was in 2008. It was called editmentor.com. And my value proposition was, when I was in film school and I was learning how to edit TV and film, I would have given my eye teeth to have high quality footage to practice on, to learn how to edit. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to start this online business where you can sell packages of unedited film and video footage as learning tools for people who were learning how to edit. And so I thought to myself, you know what? I know how to do editing. I can edit videos of these things and I can put them up online and I can say, hey, you can buy this, and people will come to the website in droves and buy lots and lots of these packages and all earn lots of money, and it'll be amazing. That did not happen because that's not how business works. I was, it was a decent idea, but it was not solving a pressing problem for someone for people who had a genuine, urgent problem. And also, it was offering these things to people who are in learning mode. So they didn't have, so a lot of the time, my crowd was in a place where they didn't have money to pay for a lot of this. So if you're offering something that people don't genuinely need and they don't have money to pay for, that is a terrible business model. And you can read all the business books in the world, but man, if sometimes you just got to do a business like that to realize, oh, that's what business is. Oh, okay. So that's how business works. Okay. So when you figure that out, you can start adding those as extra, what I call them as dots of life experience. There's a book called The Art of Asking: How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Let People Help, by a musician by the name of Amanda Palmer. And she has some amazing thoughts about creativity in there. And one of the things she talks about there is her definition of creativity. She says, think of creativity as dots. You collect dots, different experiences, different relationships, different ideas, different, all these kind of different parts of your life. And then you connect them together in unique ways. And then once you make those connections, you share them to people. She says, this is the essence of a creative human being: collecting the dots, connecting them, and sharing them. And every time you go outside of your own box to, if you're in a space where, okay, you have a foundation in accounting and you say, I want to learn about how to be a business advisor, to offer advisory services, to be a virtual CFO, to be a consultant or whatever. You have to get more dots to connect them and overlay them with your existing foundation, so that helps you move forward. I would also say that that incredibly important part to all this is the idea of making things clear and understandable. Because accountants are not they're not known for speaking in plain English. They speak accountant. They speak finance. Which makes perfect sense, because you can be accurate and you can talk about you can talk about the variation in variation in line items on the P&L, and this was down X% month over month or whatever. Whereas the business owner who doesn't know that technical speak of finance and accounting, if you say those words to that kind of person, it is entirely possible that they will feel insecure, and they'll feel insecure because they don't know what you're talking about, but they're the boss. They've gotten to where they are by being the leader and having the answers, but they've gotten to a place where they're in over their head. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't like to admit that they don't know everything. So instead of saying, well, if you can see the NOI has down X% year over year, and that combines with the trend line of the cash flow statements over here and blah, blah, blah. And instead of saying profit is down slightly compared to what we were expecting, and here's why. Here's some ideas of what I'm thinking contributes to that. They say, oh, okay, well, this is a lot more clear. That clarity of communication and understanding who they are, what they want, what's getting in their way, that kind of a thing. That's where the idea of clarity and story structure comes in.
I love that, and I completely agree. It's so easy for us to get caught up in our world and our vocabulary in our niche of accounting, but not everybody else understands that. In fact, hardly anybody else understands what we're talking about. It is much harder to distill information down in a way that your everyday person can understand it than it is to just blatantly communicate what's on the paper straight across.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what great books do, right? Great books take a complex topic that most people don't understand and make it readable to someone who doesn't know anything about it. So I love that. That is such an essential point. With all the accountants, CPAs, VCFOs that you work with all the time, what would you say is the one thing that makes the great communicators of that group stand out? What's something they do that you can see reflected in the people listening when they talk?
I think it's not something that you can distill down to one specific element, because when you see someone who is a masterful communicator, when you see someone who is a master at anything, what's happened is they have taken dozens or maybe even hundreds of fundamental elements, and they've combined them into a seamless whole so that you can't tell the individual parts. It's there's a book called The Art of Learning. It's about a guy named Josh Waitzkin, who he grew up as a child prodigy playing chess, and he became a grandmaster at chess at the age of, I don't know, what was it, 16 or something like that. Number one in the world. He was just crazy. And they made the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer after his life. This guy, Josh Waitzkin, he got to the top of his chess career, decided to walk away, and he moved into martial arts. And he became a world champion at a special variety of Tai Chi, a combat form of Tai Chi, push hands. And one of the things that he would talked about in this book called The Art of Learning, he talks about he had to learn when someone comes at him to try to throw him in a sparring match, they come into contact with him and he just flips them on their back. All they would see is this fluid motion, and boom, they're on their back, and they're saying, what just happened? But in his mind, when he was able to just sit down and think about what was happening, he knew that there were 16 different steps of how he positions his hand, where he shifts his weight, the angle of his hips, all those details that would take way too long to go into, and no one cares about the details like that. But he had internalized all that, and until it became a scene of mastery, one fluid motion. So in terms of the skills that I help people develop within the accounting and the accounting advisory world, the starting point is always understanding what story is. And story gets a bad rap sometimes, just like the word accountant gets a bad rap sometimes, because people think they know what it is when the fact is there's a lot more available there than they might realize. And without going into all the details, the number one framework that I always start with all my clients is the idea of understanding what the strategic story definition is. It's and I tell them that it is where a character wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result. That's the first couple phrases of that comes from some writings by Donald Miller, who built his business around building a story brand. So that idea, a character who wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result, it describes every human interaction for any purpose ever, period. It is that wide-ranging. It is that powerful. And I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. The question becomes, how do you apply that to your specific situation when you are engaging in any kind of communication? Because those narrative forces of strategic story, they operate on the level of gravity. They're there, whether you know it or not, whether you recognize it or not. They're always there, engaging in, driving every human engagement. So when I work with my clients, I help them understand, okay, what is the message? What are you, who are you? What is the message you want to put out into the world? What's getting in your way? And then we talk about their audience. Who are they? What do they want? What's getting in their way? And how do we, as professionals and advisors, come alongside them to be their guide to help them get what they want? So that is the foundational space to begin thinking before we can put powerful actions into play. And that's the place I always start with all my clients.
Powerful. There's to be able to sit there and take a client from where they are right now and the problems they're facing and be able to communicate to them how you can transform that for them. I'm on my school's consulting team, and I would say that's the number one word we use all the time is transformation.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to transform this client's business or this particular part of the business? So to be able to see that kind of come full circle, where if you understand what you're talking about, the client understands who you are, what you bring to the table, and then you can help them see how they can be transformed. You got the key.
That is the entire goal. That is the entire goal of life, is to see change, is to bring change into the world. And in one sense, it's what do we want? How can we get what we want? But that's not the ultimate value. The ultimate value is seeing change. That's the end to any story. That is the end. That is the value behind any business transaction. How can we help our clients imagine a future that is better, that is larger, that is greater, that is easier, that is, whatever their desire happens to be? Help them imagine a better future and come alongside them to help them get there. That is story structure right there.
Wow. It's amazing. I love it. So going with that, if you had one piece of advice you could give to young CPAs right now, what would that be?
Consider that framework within the context of yourself. Who are you? What do you love? What are you good at? What do you want? Where do you want to go? And let's say in the context of this conversation, where do you want to go in your career? Who else has done that? What is frustrating you? What's getting in your way? Have you been told that you have to go Big Four and you have to sit in an office tower downtown and stare at a screen until your eyes are bleeding? Sleep is for the weak. Screw that. That is not life. That's suffering. That is the old way, my friends. That is the old way. There are companies out there who care about their people. I work with them all the time. They're out there. If you are frustrated with where you are, the next step is to say, what do I want? Who is out there? Who can help me get there? So we can all see that change. It's that idea of applying story structure to yourself. Who is the character? What do they want? What's getting in their way? What's the change that they want to see happen? That is some of the most powerful storytelling that we can ever do, is to change who we are. Because when we change who we are and what we want, we change the direction of our life.
This conversation today has made the connection in my mind, or in my life, that storytelling is just, well, and communication in general is just helping people transform their lives to the place that they've always wanted to get it to. And that can be with ourselves too.
Agreed.
That's special. Jeff, I really appreciate everything you're doing for CPAs, for accountants. I love what you're doing over there at Greenlight. Where can my listeners and anybody find you, and how can they get in touch and learn more about what you're doing?
If you are interested in these ideas, if this stuff is resonating with you, then I have a podcast with a very limited number of episodes by intent, by design. This is not a podcast that I'm dropping hundreds of episodes. You can find out more about these ideas, how they all lay out, how they all stack on top of each other, when you go to storygreenlight.com/conversations. That's a page specifically for listeners of the Accounting Conversations podcast. Go to storygreenlight.com/conversations. And beyond that, there are other ways to get in touch with me there. If you're on LinkedIn, hit me up. I'm there pretty regularly.
Yep, you respond very quickly. Jeff, I'm so grateful that you've taken time out of your day to speak with me and share your wisdom and your light with my audience. And I want to also specifically thank you for being a part of the transformation that's happening in the accounting industry. It's people like you that are helping us move from the past accounting world to a new world that not only favors people, including the clients and the actual CPAs, but really favors business development and growth. And thank you for being a part of that and for really pushing that bright and beautiful side of the profession forward.
It's a privilege. My honor, man.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.